Does the New Testament prohibit or condemn polygamy, or a man having more than one woman? Well, if it does, then we know it's in direct conflict with the Old Testament, where there are numerous examples of men approved by God who had more than one woman or wife. I could give numerous examples, but most of you already know most of those examples. Still, I could cite Abraham and how he married Sarah and then married Hagar and had children by them both, approved by God. I could mention Jacob, who, though he wanted to marry Rachel, instead was given Leah, and then worked for several years more under their father, Leah and Rachel's father, so he could also marry Rachel. Then we have Solomon, of course. Many examples from the Old Testament that show a man having more than one woman is not condemned in that part of the Bible, and it's something God actually approved and helped bring about. So what about the New Testament? Well, this issue came up because of a comment I made in my Governments and the World video, where I was responding to an individual who made a morally and spiritually bankrupt comment by comparing the example of Joseph as an appointed ruler of Egypt, helping to save thousands, if not millions, of people from famine. The morally and spiritually bankrupt comment tried to say, in response to that example, that we don't practice polygamy anymore in the New Testament or after. So why should we assume that it's okay to hold positions in political office like Joseph? In addition to being one of the worst false analogies I've ever seen, one obvious difference is that there's nothing in the New Testament or thereafter in most governments that makes holding political office illegal. Yet, during the New Testament times, the Romans, the occupying power of Judea, made it illegal to have more than one wife. That doesn't mean the Jews always followed that law, but as the Christians began bringing in people from the nations, including Romans, it became more of an issue, something they had to be more conscious of because of what Paul writes in Romans 13. That we're to listen to the governments, the authorities that stand placed by God, and not to disobey them unless there's something explicit in the Bible that the Bible tells us to do. That the political entities that at times can be influenced by rebellious sons of God and rebellious humans, so we have to be careful. We don't listen to everything they say, like Paul tells us we sometimes have a wrestling with them. But if they tell us that there's a law that prohibits something the Bible doesn't tell us to do, see, the Bible doesn't tell us we have to have more than one wife, for example. So if the existing governments, like in Rome or like in the United States today, tell us it's illegal to have more than one wife, it's not violating the Bible in either the Old or the New Testament to follow that law. Whereas if they told us to deny the Christ, for example, that would be something Christians could not follow the governments in doing. So it's just a terrible analogy that this one commenter made that I discussed in my Governments and the World video, trying to parallel laws or the situation involving polygamy, whether the first century or today in some countries, with holding political office, which is not outlawed. But the question came up as to whether or not polygamy is even something that's permissible in the New Testament like it was in the Old Testament. And so I pointed out that really in the New Testament there is no prohibition against polygamy, which the morally and spiritually bankrupt commenter I'm talking about had brought up as if it's something we don't practice because it's no longer allowed, which is not true. The New Testament doesn't say anything against having more than one wife. It does, as we'll see in a moment, limit Christian men who are overseers or servants, deacons, to having one wife. It specifically uses the term one, mia, in Greek. But nowhere else, and for no one else, is that limitation laid down. What we do find are examples like in Matthew 24 and 25, where Jesus is giving a series of parables, talking about how a man can have more than one wife. Again, this isn't meant to promote polygamy in a country where it's against the law, because the Bible doesn't tell us that we should have more than one wife. It just shows by numerous examples all throughout the Old Testament and by several texts in the New Testament that I'm going to share in a moment that it is permitted by God. It's biblically okay, unless you're an overseer or a deacon. But that doesn't mean we have to do it or that we should violate laws against it if those laws exist in the country where we live. But let's take a look at what the New Testament actually does teach, apart from those who are overseers or deacons, when it comes to having more than one woman. The Bible nowhere ever permits a woman to have more than one man, because as it teaches, women were made for men, not men for women. And women have men's children, and if a woman has more than one man, you may not know whose children it is. And so, especially in the Old Testament, where you had a lineage to develop that ultimately led to the Messiah, these things were very important, and they still are now, right? As men, we don't want to have a woman who may be carrying another man's child. So there's obvious differences biologically and scripturally between what is permitted for a man and a woman when it comes to how many men or women you can have. You can do whatever you want. I'm talking about the Bible. Okay, if you're interested in the Bible, what it teaches, like I am, this is what it says. This is what it shows by example. Not that women can have more than one man, but that men can have more than one woman, if it's allowed, if you're not an overseer or a deacon. Let's take a look. Matthew chapter 24. We're going to read Jesus' illustration of the 10 virgins, but let's read a little bit of the context leading up to that, because some people try to argue that the virgins in this illustration are just associates of the bridegroom and not the bride, when that's not contextually how Jesus is teaching the people here. Notice what it says starting in verse 42. This is Jesus talking. Keep on the watch, therefore, because you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know one thing, that if the householder had known in what watch the thief was coming, he would have kept awake and not allowed his house to be broken into. On this account, you too prove yourselves ready. He's talking to his followers about the time when he's going to come again. Because at an hour that you do not think it to be, the Son of Man is coming. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on arriving finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. But if ever that evil slave should say in his heart, my master is delaying, and should start to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know, and will punish him with the greatest severity, and will assign him his part with the hypocrites. There is where his weeping and gnashing of teeth will be. And then he gives the illustration of the 10 virgins. The kingdom of the heavens will become like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Not to meet the friends of the bridegroom, not to accompany the bride. They are the bride. They're there to meet the bridegroom. And I'm going to show you that further in just a moment. 5 of them were foolish, 5 were discreet, right? He's continuing his parallel about people who are wise and discreet and those who are not. The foolish took their lamps, but took no oil with them, whereas the discreet took oil in their receptacles with their lamps. While the bridegroom was delaying, they all nodded and went to sleep. Right in the middle of the night there arose a cry. Here is the bridegroom, the one who's going to marry someone. Be on your way out to meet him. Then all those virgins rose and put their lamps in order. The foolish said to the discreet, "Give us some of your oil, because our lamps are about to go out." The discreet answered with the words, "Perhaps there may not quite be enough for us and you. Be on your way instead to those who sell it and buy for yourselves." While they were off to buy, the bridegroom arrived, and the virgins that were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterwards, the rest of the virgins also came, saying, "Sir, open to us." In answer he said, "I tell you the truth, I do not know you. Keep on the watch, therefore, because you know neither the day nor the hour." As Christians, we all know this applies to Christians, whom, as I'm going to show you next, are specifically described as virgins to be married to the Christ. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. 2 Corinthians 11:2. So here you have the illustration by Jesus where a bridegroom meets with 5 virgins who were ready, and they go in with him to the feast. There's no tradition that specifically or clearly states that there's some other way of interpreting this parable than that those virgins would be married to the one they met and entered into the feast with. And it's given in the context of Christian approval, of Christians meeting the Son of Man when he comes. Look at how it is described for us in 2 Corinthians. Paul says, "For I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy, for I personally promised you in marriage to one husband, the bridegroom, that I might present you as a chaste virgin to the Christ." This is how Christians understand our relationship to the Christ. Like the 5 virgins who were ready when he came, so that we could be married to him as the bride of Christ, further described in Revelation as 144,000 virgins. Whether that number is literally 144,000 or stands for another number, the imagery and association is obvious, is it not? Except for anyone who simply cannot handle what the Bible teaches about a man being able to have more than one woman. Again, in a Christian sense, unless you're an overseer or deacon. We'll go to that text in just a moment. But now let's take a look at what Jesus had to say about adultery. Because some people not only misunderstand what adultery is in the Bible, but they try to use the accounts in the New Testament where Jesus talks about it to show that, again, a man, in their view, can only have one woman and a woman only one man. So let's take a look at those accounts. Matthew chapter 5. This is the first time Jesus brings up this whole issue of divorce and a man and a wife. Matthew 5:31 through 32. And here he says, "Moreover, it was said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce," referring back to Moses. "However, I say to you that everyone divorcing his wife, except on the account of fornication, which is porneia, pornography, gross abusive sex." It's not just relations between a man and a woman, like normal sex. It's pornography, porneia. "Makes her a subject for adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Now notice, he specifically limits what he's talking about where it concerns adultery. Some people think that if a man is married to a woman and he has another woman, that's adultery. But that's not adultery. It's not adultery in the Bible because men did have more than one woman. I gave several examples already involving Abraham, Jacob, and Solomon. It's when a man or a woman takes a man or a woman who is either married to someone else already or who is divorced from someone. So a man can be married to someone and take another woman. just like we read about in the Old Testament numerous times. Here, Jesus says that if you divorce your wife and marry a divorced woman, that's adultery. Because what God has yoked together, you're not supposed to bring apart, except on the grounds of porneia. Let's take a look at how that's further explained in Matthew 19. This is where Jesus talks about a little more. Matthew 19, 3 through 11. There it says, the Pharisees came up to him, that is Jesus, intent on tempting him and saying, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife on every sort of ground? In reply, he said, did you not read that the one who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and will stick to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, right? So anytime a man, like with Abraham, when he took Sarah as his wife, the two became one flesh. When he took Hagar as his wife, the two became one flesh. It doesn't mean by two here, only two. He doesn't say that, right? He's talking about all the way back from the beginning and up until this point, where again, we have numerous examples in the Hebrew Scriptures or the Greek Septuagint, Old Testament, where men had more than one woman and they were approved. God even arranged for it. But when the man takes a woman, the two become one flesh, so that they are no longer two but one. Therefore, what God has yoked together, let no man put apart. This is why he speaks against divorced men and women taking another mate or person, husband or wife, because you're not supposed to do that. A man can remain married, again, like Abraham or like Jacob or like Solomon, and take another woman according to the Bible, unless you're an overseer or deacon. We'll get to in a moment. So I want you to understand, though, that it's talking about the seriousness of divorcing your woman or divorcing your man and then going and finding someone else. You're not supposed to do that. So they said to him, why then did Moses prescribe a certificate of dismissal and divorcing her? Jesus said to them, Moses, out of regard for your hard-heartedness, made the concession to you of divorcing your wives, plural. But such has not been the case from the beginning. See, you're not supposed to be divorcing your wife or your husband. But he's specifically talking to the Pharisees here and how they're not supposed to be leaving their wives, even if you don't like them. Even if you start to dislike the wife you have and you start to like another woman, well, you either take that woman and make her a part of your family with the wife you don't like, or you stay with the woman you don't like and that's it. If you can't make room, like we'll talk about further in a moment, for the wife that you like and the wife you don't like, too bad. You're not allowed to get rid of the wife you don't like, or any wife that you take as your own. And then he says again, I say to you that whoever divorces his wife, again, he's specifically talking about those who divorce their wife, except on the ground of porneia, and marries another, commits adultery. See, if you divorce the wife and marry another, he doesn't say if you marry another and you're already with a woman, that's adultery. He specifically states, whoever divorces his wife and marries another. And so his disciples say to him, if such is the situation of a man with his wife, it is not advisable to marry. And Jesus says, not all men make room for the same, but only those who have the gift or who have been made to give. Right? So because if you had more than one woman, you would have to make room for it, wouldn't you? You'd have to be a pretty giving person in order to not be able to leave one wife and go get another, and to instead have to keep both or more, right? You'd have to be able to make room and be giving, to have been made able to give, is how it states in the Greek text. If that's the case, right? So that's what they're talking about, right? If we can't get rid of one wife and then go get another, then we're going to have two, we're going to have multiple wives and one we don't like, and we still have to make room. That's why he says not all make room for it. Let's take a look at Mark 10, another account of Jesus' discussion about divorce and marriage and adultery. Mark 10, 6 through 12. And here he states, they ask him the same question about, is it lawful to divorce on every sort of grounds? And he goes on, he states that from the beginning he made them male and female, right? Adam and Eve. And on this account a man will leave his father and his mother, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has yoked together, let no man put apart. And it says, when again in the house the disciples began to question him about this, and he said to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. He doesn't say, if you're married and you marry another woman, like Abraham, like Jacob, like Solomon, and many others, that you're committing adultery. He specifically, once again, is referring to those who divorce their wife and then go marry another. If ever a woman divorces her husband, right, leaves her husband, and then goes and marries another, it's the same thing. A woman is not allowed to have more than one man, though, according to the Bible. It's not anywhere shown by example or described as something that's permitted. And women are said to have been made for man, not men for women. So there's no comparison in the Bible between men who clearly have had more than one woman without divorcing their wife, even being made to do so by God, and women who were never made to do that in life, which would complicate the whole involvement with different men and their children by the one wife and not being able to tell whose child it is. And so there's clear reasons why men and women being different biologically, men can have more than one woman, but women are not supposed to have more than one man. You can do whatever you want. I'm talking about the Bible, what the Bible teaches and shows by example, that men can have more than one woman if they don't divorce the women they already took as their wife. It is never said or shown by example that women can marry more than one man, which wouldn't even make sense when it comes to the children of the different men and being able to determine whose it is. Whereas with a man, he can keep more than one woman and have children by those women and maintain order in a household without having to be confused about whose children they are. Let's take a look now at Luke, where this is brought up again. Luke 16:18. And here we read, everyone that divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. And he that marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. For the third time, fourth if you count that it's twice in Matthew, Jesus is explicit. There's no question about what he's talking about, is there? He's talking about people who divorce their wife and marry another. He is not talking about people who are married, don't divorce that wife, and then take another. Just like we see over and over and over again in the Old Testament and in Jesus' illustration of the 10 virgins, where the bridegroom takes 5 as his wives. At least that's the plain reading of the text in association with the Christian understanding that Jesus is talking about, where when he comes back again, we are married to him as virgins, just like those 5 were married to the bridegroom, which is depicting him in that illustration. All right, now let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 7, because some on the comments, and I pinned them to the video Governments and the World, where I got into a few commenters, and one sincere question that is the one pinned at the top that brought up this text in 1 Corinthians 7 that speaks about a condition that exists and how people should deal with it. So here Paul says, now concerning the things about which you wrote, it is well for a man not to touch a woman. Yet because of the prevalence of porneia, sexually abusive practices, right? You can see it depicted very frequently in Greek and Roman art, even though the Romans did have laws and tried to, under certain emperors, maintain morality a little bit better. Paul's talking to the Corinthians here, and he says, because of the prevalence of porneia, let each man have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. Now, it doesn't say here one wife. It doesn't use the word mia or the equivalent for wife and husband. It uses the reflexive pronoun in the first case for the man, his own wife, heautu, a wife of his own. And then for the woman, it uses a form of the word idios. It says ton idion andra eketo. Each have the own man or husband. That doesn't mean only. Right? Just like in Acts 20:28, it talks about how God bought the Christian congregation with the blood of his own. It uses idios there. But Jesus is not God's only son. He has many sons of God. It's talking about his own family. Right? So we're each to have your own wife or husband that is part of our family. Right? Our own wife, not some other woman out there that we run around and commit fornication with, porneia, abusive sexual practices. Have your own woman. Have your own husband. It doesn't limit it or talk at all about more than one or one here. That is only done in 1 Timothy 3:2 and 12. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. But I want to make that point very clear here. Notice, though, again, it doesn't say because it's wrong. It doesn't say because the Bible says, we shouldn't have more than one wife or husband. It says because of sexually abusive practices, you should have your own woman or your own man. And in the Bible, we know by example and numerous texts, including Jesus' parable of the 10 virgins, that men were allowed to have more than one woman as their own. Women were not. They were to have their own husband, meaning one in the context of the examples and what was allowed in the Hebrew scriptures. So these texts do not in any way explicitly limit a man being able only to have one woman. That is done here. 1 Timothy chapter 3. Where it says, that statement is faithful in verse 1. If any man is reaching out for an office of overseer, he is desirous of a fine work. The overseer should therefore be irreprehensible, a husband of one wife, uses one there, mia, moderate in habits, sound in mind, orderly, hospitable, qualified to teach. Right? If you have more than one woman, at least as I understand Paul here, it's going to be much more difficult for you to be out being an overseer for a whole group of other people, because you have to take care of your own household, your own wives. And he's giving here instruction about how this should be done at this time. In addition to knowing that having more than one wife is outlawed by the Romans. So people who were in more noticeable positions like overseers would run a much greater risk, even if they were following the biblical examples of men who had more than one woman. Right? And then in verse 12, we read similarly, let ministerial servants be husbands of one wife. Uses one there, mia. Is the only two times that happens, specifically in relation to those who are seeking additional responsibilities over other people that would make that much more difficult to do if you had more than one woman presiding in a fine manner over their children and their own households. So, the Bible nowhere explicitly prohibits a man from having more than one woman. It does limit what overseers and deacons or servants, according to 1 Timothy 3, can have in terms of a woman. 1 Corinthians 7 speaks about the prevalence of abusive sexual practices and how each man and woman should have their own man and woman, not people on the outside who aren't a part of your own family. And according to the biblical examples, those who are not overseers or deacons or servants, 1 Timothy 3, could have more than one woman. Jesus showed that by his parable of the 10 virgins as well. And he himself marries 144,000 virgins, either literally or figuratively for another number. So it's not like it's associated with something bad by Jesus. It never is. It only is when you leave the wife you have to marry another. Because no one is supposed to break up what God has brought together. But we know, again, as I have repeatedly been stating, as you can see for yourself easily by reading the Old Testament, men became one flesh with a woman and with another woman and with other women at times without violating God's law that he made for us from the beginning. And further, in conclusion, in the New Testament book of Acts, chapter 15 and 21, the apostles give decrees specifically to several things that people are not to do because of the nations and because the law of Moses is read among them and the Jews. None of those prohibitions involve only having one woman for the men. And it states that they in the Holy Spirit favored adding no further burden to them than what is stated. So we do the same thing. We don't add a bunch of burdens to people. If it's illegal in the country in which you live, and it doesn't violate God's law to follow the law of the country in which you live, you follow that law. They're God's servant. It's God's arrangement. But if you live in a country where you're allowed by law to have more than one woman as a man, and you're not an overseer or a deacon, according to 1 Timothy 3, there's nothing in the Bible that says that's wrong. There's no burden in the Bible added to someone like that. So we don't add burdens to people like that. We teach 3 things. Christian witnesses of Jah. One God the Father. Son of God the Messiah, sent by God the Father. Treat each other the way you want to be treated. Everything else is either obvious and explicit, right? Like stealing, murdering, lying. Or it's not. And we allow you to decide what to do according to the examples and laws in the Bible and the laws of the country in which you live, so long as they don't conflict with the Bible.